The Mexican Grand Prix once again delivered one of the most intense, unpredictable and action-packed race starts of the entire Formula One season. The spectacle of 20 cars rushing down the long main straight at the Autódromo Hermanos Rodríguez never fails to produce breathtaking moments, and 2025 was no exception. Beyond the usual chaos that unfolded at the end of the straight, with several drivers forced wide, cutting the corner, or even running off the track as tends to happen nearly every year in Mexico City, it was the very first 15 seconds after the lights went out that truly defined how the opening laps would unfold. Within that brief window, countless small yet crucial events occurred, many of which could easily be missed amid the sheer mayhem and noise of the start. As the red lights extinguished, both Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton executed near-perfect launches off the line, reacting instantly and making full use of the grip available. Among the front runners, their reactions and clutch modulation were textbook examples of precision. In contrast, Charles Leclerc experienced a slightly more difficult start, losing a touch of rear grip and suffering a brief but costly moment of wheelspin. The Monegasque driver's issue appeared to be caused by a combination of two factors. First, a clutch release that was not as clean as expected, and second, starting from the so-called dirty side of the grid, a section of tarmac that naturally offers less traction due to the accumulation of dust, debris, and fewer rubber deposits from previous sessions. From that moment onward, the tactical battle for the slipstream began, one of the most delicate and crucial aspects of any Formula One race start. The aerodynamic toe plays a fundamental role in determining who gets the momentum advantage on long straights, and in Mexico, with its lengthy 800-meter run to turn 1, that effect becomes even more decisive. Lando Norris made his intentions clear from the very first few meters. The British driver kept his McLaren on a perfectly straight trajectory, which meant that instead of providing an aerodynamic tow to the Ferrari directly behind him, driven by Charles Leclerc, he was instead giving it to Lewis Hamilton, who had started slightly further back but directly in line. That decision instantly changed the dynamic. It also explained why Lando Norris didn't initially move to defend against Charles Leclerc. He had likely noticed that Leclerc's start wasn't ideal, and therefore didn't see an immediate threat coming from the Ferrari. Realizing that his initial getaway wasn't strong enough, Charles Leclerc reacted instinctively by cutting diagonally across the track in an attempt to tuck in behind the McLaren and pick up its slipstream. The Ferrari driver aimed to maximize his straight-line speed and simultaneously block Lewis Hamilton, whose start had been considerably better. With Charles Leclerc now directly in front of him, Lewis Hamilton found himself with limited space and was forced to slightly lift off the throttle. Telemetry data later showed a reduction of about 11%. Finding no clear room to the left, the 7-time Formula One world champion quickly switched positions with Leclerc, moving toward his right side and immediately putting his foot back down to regain speed. Lewis Hamilton's acceleration was visibly stronger, aided by a cleaner launch and more consistent momentum. At this stage, Lando Norris once again demonstrated remarkable awareness and composure, likely following a pre-planned defensive move discussed with his race engineer before the start. He began gradually shifting toward the inside line of the track. By doing so, he deprived Charles Leclerc of another chance to catch a strong slipstream, and simultaneously positioned himself to defend into turn 1, which was still roughly 700 meters away. Both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton naturally followed Lando Norris toward the right-hand side of the track. The British driver now held the advantage, sitting on Charles Leclerc's right-hand side, and directly behind Lando Norris's McLaren, where he could benefit from the strongest aerodynamic tow. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc, boxed in and unable to get a clean airflow, tried to remain as close as possible to both cars in front, running just centimeters behind Lewis Hamilton at speeds approaching 250 kilometers per hour. Further behind, Max Verstappen, who had already overtaken George Russell's Mercedes during the initial phase, took full advantage of the situation by locking onto Charles Leclerc's slipstream. The Dutch driver's reaction time and positioning were impeccable, as he perfectly anticipated the unfolding scenario ahead of him. As the cars exceeded 250 kilometers per hour, the aerodynamic tow effect intensified dramatically. The drivers who benefited the most at this stage were Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. The reigning world champion in the Red Bull closed the gap rapidly to Charles Leclerc, almost touching the rear of the Ferrari before darting to the left, the only open space available, since Charles Leclerc was squeezed toward the right by Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen began drawing alongside the Ferrari, while Lewis Hamilton continued to be pulled forward by Lando Norris's McLaren, his car exceeding 300 km per hour and carrying a speed advantage of about 8 km per hour over Charles Leclerc and nearly 14 km per hour over Lando Norris. However, Lewis Hamilton soon found himself in an increasingly precarious situation. Carrying excessive speed with no clear path ahead, the British driver was forced to lift off once again, this time by 27% for around 2.1 seconds, a significant interruption of momentum at such a critical moment. Seeking to free himself from the congestion, Lewis Hamilton attempted to move left, edging toward Charles Leclerc's line. It was precisely at this point that a rare moment of cooperation between the two Ferrari drivers unfolded. Instead of closing the door and potentially trapping Lewis Hamilton behind Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc shifted slightly left, giving his teammate, who was also battling for position, just enough space to emerge and challenge the McLaren for position. Lando Norris, who had no slipstream ahead of him and therefore less top-end speed, was now the slowest of the four cars. Lewis Hamilton nearly managed to pull alongside him, and all four drivers, Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Max Verstappen, approached the braking zone virtually side by side, separated by only a few meters. In the process of making room for Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc inadvertently pushed Max Verstappen slightly outward, forcing the Dutch driver to brake on the outside curb. The Red Bull briefly lost grip, bouncing and sliding violently over the curb before heading straight onto the grass, narrowly avoiding a collision. At this point, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc made slight side contact, though fortunately without sustaining any damage. Lando Norris, perfectly positioned on the inside and braking with precision, maintained control and emerged from the corner in the lead. Both Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton reached the end of the straight at an impressive 312 km per hour. A remarkable figure for Lando Norris, who, starting from pole position, could rely only on his engine performance and aerodynamic efficiency rather than a tow. The tight and compact bodywork design of the McLaren in Mexico City likely played a crucial role in helping achieve that top speed. Charles Leclerc, despite the early setback, reached 314 km per hour, while Max Verstappen recorded a peak of 320 km per hour, underlining the incredible straight-line speed of the Red Bull RB21. Telemetry data and high-speed footage clearly confirm this sequence of events, including Max Verstappen's rally-style excursion across the grass, during which he momentarily registered higher speeds than the cars that remained on the tarmac. Charles Leclerc, who had cut across the corner and rejoined the track, briefly lifted to allow Lando Norris to retake the lead. However, what followed was a confusing situation. Both Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc yielded only to Lando Norris, while Lewis Hamilton, who had navigated turns 2 and 3 directly behind Lando Norris in second place, found himself demoted to fourth. Frustrated, Lewis Hamilton immediately questioned the fairness of the situation over team radio. Max Verstappen hadn't given the place back immediately, prompting Lewis Hamilton to launch an attack, running off the racing line as both drivers fought fiercely for position in the opening lap chaos. Later analysis using onboard camera footage, helicopter shots, and telemetry data reconstructed the precise moment when Charles Leclerc suffered a sudden snap of oversteer roughly 3/4 through turn 1, forcing him to run straight across the grass. This detailed reconstruction clearly illustrated the relative positioning of every car at that exact instant. The data confirmed beyond any doubt that Lewis Hamilton's SF25 was ahead of Charles Leclerc's Ferrari by approximately 4 meters. His post-race frustration, therefore, was completely justified. Having legitimately been in second place behind Lando Norris without leaving the track, Lewis Hamilton suddenly found himself relegated to fourth, as neither Charles Leclerc nor Max Verstappen yielded the positions voluntarily. Within just 2 laps, Lewis Hamilton once again came under pressure from Max Verstappen and later received a time penalty that ultimately compromised his entire race. Yet those opening seconds, from the moment the lights went out to the braking point at turn 1, remain one of the most fascinating sequences of the entire event. They perfectly encapsulate the incredible precision, reflexes, and split-second decision-making that define modern Formula One racing, where drivers must operate at the limit under immense pressure. From this analysis, Lando Norris clearly emerged as the biggest winner of the start, displaying perfect composure and spatial awareness. Lewis Hamilton also performed strongly despite the setbacks, while Charles Leclerc's getaway, although not disastrous, was less than ideal and ultimately costly. The Monegasque driver, however, would later redeem himself with a solid race performance, which in itself deserves a separate and detailed analysis.